Okay, so you saw the title. Prepare to learn everything there is to know about 3 of the weirdest NFL players to ever play the game of football. And let's start right away with the first guy, Chris Hansen. So Chris Hansen was the star of Dateline NBC's To Catch a Predator. Wrong Chris Hansen. The Chris Hansen that we're going to be looking over was a punter back in college and in the NFL, but it did take him a long time to eventually get into the NFL because as a punter, of course, he went undrafted in 1999. You know, he had to go through the usual punter shenanigans, getting cut from Cleveland, then Miami, then the Packers, and then he found himself back in Miami when he would finally get his first real chance at making an NFL roster. And when he got that chance, he joined Miami and they basically just immediately sent him off to Europe where he joined the Barcelona Dragons and punted for them for an entire year, and things were actually going really well over there. He was punting all year, but in the actual last game of the European season, Chris Hansen tore his ACL, which would just be brutal for any player, but for a punter, that is the most important injury you could possibly suffer. So I'm not gonna lie, it was looking real dark for Chris Hansen at this time. Literally on the side while he was trying to make an NFL roster, he was a part-time substitute teacher for his local high school. Stuff that you just don't hear about unless it's the 1960s. But Chris Hansen just never gave up. He kept pushing hard and eventually he really got a chance in 2001 when the Jacksonville Jaguars signed him to the active roster. And he knew he had talent and just went out there and showed it, as in 2001, in his first season, he was pretty much by most statistical measures one of the best punters in the entire league. And in all the punting statistics that, actually exist, he dominated, finishing 6th in the league in punting average, had a metric crap ton of punting yards, and had the 4th best net average in the entire league. And a punter's main quality is pretty much supposed to just be longevity, and I guess Chris Hansen kept that going for the next year at least, as in 2002, he made the Pro Bowl and was added to a list that had different players from different eras coming together, as you had guys like Jerry Rice, LaDainian Tomlinson, Randy Moss, Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, Rod Woodson, and of course, our pal Chris Hansen on the roster. So after an incredibly successful 2002 season, Chris Hansen had to celebrate, right? And he got real rowdy. As you'll grow to learn, this Chris Hansen must have a twisted sexual desire for getting injured in the most bizarre ways possible. Basically, as he rightfully celebrated his great 2002 season in the offseason, Chris Hansen got a little too wild on a Friday night with his fellow kicker buddy, and the two both suffered 1st and 2nd degree burns when a f***ing fondue pot fell on both of them. So if you haven't already, please, maybe say a quick prayer for the PTSD that Chris Hansen must be feeling on a daily basis. I mean, I can only imagine the mental trauma he must go through every time he sees a bull. But anyway, like I said before, Chris Hansen wanted more pain. And in the 2003 season, when he was still on the Jaguars, I know I made a short on this, but if you don't know about this whole situation, the Jaguar slogan in 2003 was "Keep Choppin' Wood." A cute little slogan to keep the guys motivated, but the problem was that head coach Jack Del Rio thought it would be perfectly safe and within safety regulations to install a log in the locker room with a medieval axe right next to it so players could impale the tree stump whenever they felt the urge. And shockingly, this was actually working, with big-ass dudes like John Henderson on the team. If anything, the stump was in more danger than the players themselves. But that's where our good old friend Chris Hansen comes into play. After witnessing pretty much every warm body on the team step up to the plate and take a swing at the log, on one fateful day, Chris Hansen thought to himself, it's time. He wanted to prove that kickers are people too, so he picked up the axe, lifted it over his head, and lodged the cleaver straight into his foot, tearing the same ACL he had torn in Europe, and was placed on injured reserve ending his season. He stuck around for a few more years in Jacksonville and New England, so he recovered from his second ACL tear, but you know, that's pretty much as much action as a punter is ever gonna get, whereas a quarterback, they can get a little bit more. Time to talk about a guy who I would be shocked if any of you actually knew who he was. This is the 1950s and 60s quarterback phenomenon, Tobin Rote. One of the best names I've ever heard of, but anyways, he was drafted 17th overall in 1950 by the Green Bay Packers. And if you didn't know, back then, before Vince Lombardi came, being drafted to the Packers was a death sentence. Pretty much the equivalent to being drafted by the Browns in like 2016. So like I said, contrary to popular belief, the Packers actually existed before Joe Lombardi came in 1959. And before Lombardi, Tobin Rote carried the whole team on his back. Seriously, from 1950 to 1956, Rote was a top 3 quarterback in the league with 11,535 passing yards, 89 passing touchdowns, and a ridiculous 29 rushing touchdowns. Don't even ask me how that could have possibly happened. And the sad part is, nobody was giving this man his flowers, because through his 7 years on the Packers never had a single winning season, and he only made 1 Pro Bowl, which was just so disrespectful. I mean, a dude named Dickie Mogul made it in the Pro Bowl in 1955 over Tobin Rote. Yes, sir, that is one-time NFL Pro Bowler Dickie Mogul. So after 7 years where the Packers couldn't give Tobin any help at all, they just traded him off to the Lions for like 3 players, $2,000 and a pack of cigarettes, and just sat in the Vince Lombardi waiting room for the next 2 years. And then meanwhile, for some godforsaken reason, the Lions, who traded for Tobin Rote, already had possibly the best quarterback in the entire league on the roster already in Bobby Lane. So Tobin Rote, who could have been an MVP in the NFL if more people noticed him, was forced to watch from the sideline for a whole year. But Tobin Rote was not going to let that happen, so he basically just casted a spell on Bobby Lane, who in turn broke his leg later in the season, allowing Tobin Rote to play for the rest of the year. And it turns out, when you give a talented quarterback a good roster for the first time in his career, then good things happen, as he basically filled in for Bobby Lane, acting like nothing had changed, and he took the Lions straight to the 1957 NFL championship game. And in that championship game, the sorcerer that was Tobin Rote went beyond Super Saiyan. He dropped a 50-piece, 50 points on the Cleveland Browns and produced the most disrespectful quarterback comparison graph in the history of maybe sports. Poor Milt Plum here got absolutely dunked on, as Tobin Rote dropped 280 yards passing for 4 touchdowns and a passer rating of 146.4. And oh, yeah, right, I forgot he also just messed around and ran for a touchdown just because why not? So the Lions management saw Tobin Rote just trounce the entire NFL in a small sample size and immediately canned Bobby Lane, their Hall of Fame quarterback, almost instantly after the NFL championship game happened. And this turned out to be a mistake, because as you might be able to piece together, the Lions hadn't won a single meaningful game since this game happened. It turns out black magic was actually at play, as after being kicked out by the Lions, Bobby Lane cast a 50-year curse on the Lions and transferred the spell into the living vessel that was Tobin Rote. And for the next couple of years in Detroit, Tobin Rote was still cool, but played much worse than in previous seasons, and the Lions never won anything with Tobin, and he was cut after the 1959 season. So I couldn't tell you why this keeps happening, but yet again, this insanely talented quarterback was left abandoned on the side of the road, and it wouldn't take too long for him to find another team, but not an NFL one, because this time he found himself in the CFL, joining the Toronto Argonauts. What the hell is an Argonaut? An Argonaut is a small floating octopus, the female of which has webbed sail-like arms. The more you know. Anyway, Tobin eventually found himself in Canada, and he was only there for a short time, but my god, was his gravity felt. As he only played 3 seasons in the CFL, but in just his first year, he threw for 4,247 yards and an absurd 38 touchdowns. And I know it's not fair to make this comparison at all, but comparing his stats to the best quarterback in the NFL in 1960 with Johnny Unitas, I can't understand why this man couldn't find a job in the NFL. So eventually, after 3 years of drinking syrup or whatever in Canada, he eventually came back to America and this time joined the AFL instead of the NFL. You know, people expected him to be rusty, right? Because he hadn't played in the AFL ever, and hell, he hadn't even been in America since the 1950s, so it would definitely take him a long time to get a job. I guess I'll just shut up then. In his first year in the AFL, not only did our boy Tobin Rote quarterback one of the best offenses ever and win the MVP himself, but the offense was so good that the MVP voters basically just let him share the MVP with his fellow Hall of Fame receiver Lance Allworth. And in that wet dream of a season, Tobin Rote and the Chargers ran through the entire AFL league and won the AFL championship as, of course, Tobin dropped another 50 whopper on the Patriots and then rode off into the sunset. So Tobin Rote would only last one more season in the NFL, and he did try a comeback with the Broncos at the age of 38, which didn't really work out, whereas another quarterback, everyone's favorite Harvard graduate, would stick around for a little bit longer. Ryan Fitzpatrick. How can you possibly hate this man? And if you can believe it, this goofball right here went to Harvard University. He was smart as hell and used his big old brain to have rumored to get a perfect score on the Wonderlic test in just 9 minutes before the NFL draft. And if you don't know, the Wonderlic test is basically just a little quiz that's given to quarterbacks to see how well they can read defenses and make in-game adjustments, stuff like that. And well, Ryan Fitzpatrick's recorded Wonderlic score is already 48. So although he may have scored higher, 48 is already the highest score a quarterback has ever registered. Anyway, Ryan Fitzpatrick found himself drafted in the 7th round of the 2005 NFL draft by the Rams, and people didn't really know what to think of him at all. But people would figure out quickly, because literally right after he was drafted, the pure lunacy that was Ryan Fitzpatrick's career got cranked into maximum overdrive. Basically, as the third string quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick wasn't supposed to play at all, right? That's pretty routine. But throughout the season, both Mark Bulger and the backup quarterback sustained injuries in front of him, leaving the third string quarterback as the only guy standing to play in a Week 12 game against the Texans. And in this game against the Texans, they were down 24-3 until Ryan Fitzpatrick decided to lock in. He was not going to let them lose this game, dropping touchdown after touchdown and just barely forced overtime. And you know what? Take a guess. Just take a wild guess. What do you think happened in the end of Ryan Fitzpatrick's first ever NFL game? I mean, of course, things just kept going perfectly as Ryan Fitzpatrick threw a walk-off 56-yard touchdown to win the game. But as you'll come to find out, the Ryan Fitzpatrick experience always comes with a trade-off, as he was pretty much just abysmal throughout the entire rest of the 2006 season and barely got any chances to play at all. And I guess that was the story of his career for a while, as he had a short stint in Cincinnati before eventually finding himself in Buffalo, where his career trajectory would pretty much be cemented forever in 2011. After getting rid of Trent Edwards, the Bills were pretty much just left with Ryan Fitzpatrick as almost the only quarterback on the roster, and to start the season, if there was a quarter season MVP award, it might have gone to Ryan Fitzpatrick. You probably won't believe me, but through the first 3 games of the season, Fitzmagic went berserk, going 72 for 111 on passes, 841 yards, 9 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions with a passer rating of 103.5, as the Bills had easily the most efficient offense in the NFL, dropping at least 34 points in all 3 games. Everything was going perfectly. The Bills were going to win the Super Bowl, and for his reward, Ryan got handed a gargantuan contract extension, and then the Bills realized that Ryan Fitzpatrick is a double-edged sword. It's one of the most commonly used phrases in literature itself. If you are getting Fitzmagic, you are also going to receive Fitzception. And of course, immediately after week 3, Ryan Fitzpatrick just stopped giving a shit, because he and the Bills would go on to lose 10 of their next 13 games and wouldn't even come close to the playoffs. So the Bills pretty much just immediately paid for their horrendous decision, as Fitzmagic effectively sunk the ship by himself, So in order to stop him from sabotaging the team any further, the Bills were forced to cut the man just one season later. And hey, Fitzpatrick was back right where he was before, as he jumped around from Tennessee and Houston until he curiously found himself on the Jets. And in 2015, Fitzpatrick joined a New York team that was just, you know, the classic Jets, another steaming pile of sewage, so everyone was pretty much just expecting another one-season stand with Fitzception. But Ryan Fitzpatrick had an evil plan for the next couple of years, and he completed this plan scarily well. With the Jets during his first year, Fitzpatrick was possibly the greatest single-season quarterback the Jets have ever had, as comparing him to the other greatest Jets season ever. I know, it's a tough scene when the Jets' best quarterbacks are Vinny Testaverde and Ryan Fitzpatrick, but for just this 1 year, Fitzmagic was borderline elite. And best of all, Ryan Fitzpatrick was so close to actually getting the Jets into the playoffs, but he fell just short. So going into the next season, what do you think happened? Do you think that Ryan Fitzpatrick kept this up and kept going? No, that didn't happen. 2016 was a train wreck for Ryan Fitzpatrick, as Fitzception came out to play for the whole year, as he only threw 12 touchdowns to 17 interceptions in just 8 games, and he would be benched for Bryce Petty after going 3-8. Anyway, you know the drill at this point. Fitzpatrick's contract runs out. He needs to find a new team, rinse, repeat. But you'd think that teams would then learn at this point that Ryan Fitzpatrick is nothing short of a professional NFL con man. But no, because he found himself in Tampa Bay, where early in the 2018 season, he started off the year casually by playing maybe the best game ever played against the Saints, dropping 417 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a damn near perfect passer rating. He's just so confusing. Then he did it 2 more times in a row, then did an interview with a luxurious chest main showing, and then battled Jameis Winston for the quarterback job for the rest of the season. Literally all he did with the Bucs was confuse everyone as to who their best quarterback on the roster was, and in just 1 year, he would put his eye on the vacant quarterback spot in Miami. They wanted to get their hands on Tua in the NFL draft and were prepared to roll out their famous slogan, "Tank for Tua." And they needed the perfect quarterback to help lose games for them, so of course they signed Ryan Fitzpatrick on the one condition that he would promise to be, bad. And pretty bad he was, as although they did win more games than expected, things worked out for the Dolphins in the end as they got Tua anyways. But in the last game of the season, Ryan Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins would face off against the New England Patriots. And I didn't mention anything about this little rivalry before, but Ryan Fitzpatrick does not like Tom Brady whatsoever for his play on the field. I mean, physical attributes are a whole different ballgame. Anyways, this game was also just crucial for the Patriots because not only was it Tom Brady's last regular season game as a Patriot, but if they won this game, then they wouldn't have to play against the Titans in the wild card. But Ryan Fitzpatrick was going to make that happen as he flipped back the switch and outplayed Tom Brady throughout the entire game, even orchestrating a game-winning drive, making sure he handed Tom Brady one more steamy L before he called it a career. And that was kind of it for Ryan Fitzpatrick. He stuck around in Miami for another year and played sparingly when Tua got hurt. He ruined a Saturday night for me and then called it a career after one final season with Washington. So his career was definitely the textbook definition of weird and inconsistent. But you know, if you get pictures like this that actually can exist, I think you've done pretty well for yourself in the NFL. Anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe. I got a lot of videos on the channel just like this one. And if you like this video, then watch this video right here where I went over the biggest cheating scandal in NFL history. It's pretty good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.